From 1854 to 1929, the orphan train movement in the United States was a controversial social experiment that relocated an estimated 200,000 to 250,000 orphaned, abandoned, or impoverished children from crowded cities like New York to rural homes in the Midwest and West. The goal was to provide these street children with better lives on farms, but in reality, many were treated as cheap labor or suffered severe abuse. During the 1880s, at its peak, children were often put up for selection in auction, like events, and countless were placed in loving families, while others were thrust into nightmarish homes. Wanting origins and purpose of the orphan train movement. The orphan train movement, which ran from 1854 to 1929, emerged as a bold and innovative response to one of the most pressing social crises of 19th century America, the plight of thousands of homeless, orphaned, and impoverished children roaming the streets of rapidly growing cities like New York. At its core, the movement was the brainchild of Charles Loring Brace, a young minister and philanthropist who founded the Children's Aid Society in 1853. Brace's vision was revolutionary for its time. He sought to rescue these vulnerable children not by confining them to overcrowded institutions or almshouses, but by relocating them to rural farming families in the Midwest and West, where he believed they would find moral guidance, hard work, and a chance at a better life. To understand the origins of this movement, one must first grasp the dire conditions in mid-19th century New York City. The city was exploding with population growth, fueled by waves of European immigrants fleeing famine, poverty, and political unrest. Between 1840 and 1880's population more than doubled, reaching over 800,000 by the time of the Civil War. This influx strained housing, sanitation, and employment, creating sprawling slums like the notorious Five Points neighborhood, infamous for its violence, disease, and desperation. Epidemics of cholera, typhoid, and yellow fever swept through tenements, claiming countless lives and leaving behind orphans in their wake. Estimates suggest that by the 1850s, between 10,000 and 30,000 children lived on the streets of New York alone, often called street Arabs, for their nomadic, survivalist existence. These children, many of whom were not full orphans but had been abandoned by overwhelmed or destitute parents, scraped by his newsboys, bootblacks, match sellers, or ragpickers. They slept in alleys, under stairwells, or in abandoned buildings, vulnerable to exploitation, gang recruitment, and crime. Jacob Riis, the famous photographer and reformer, later captured their harsh reality in images of ragged youths huddled in doorways or sleeping on grates for warmth. Police reports from the era describe them as a dangerous class, prone to theft and vagrancy, with many ending up in prisons or almshouses alongside adults. Existing solutions were woefully inadequate. Orphanages and asylums, often run by religious or charitable groups, were overcrowded, underfunded, and regimented. Children received minimal education, faced harsh discipline, and were frequently released at a young age with little preparation for independent life. Almshouses mixed children with the mentally ill, criminals, and the elderly, exposing them to further trauma. There were no systematic child welfare laws or social services. The federal government played no role in child protection until much later. Enter Charles Loring Brace, born in 1826 in Connecticut to a well-educated family. A graduate of Yale, Brace initially pursued theology, but was deeply influenced by social reform movements, including abolitionism and European models of child rescue. While studying in New York, he worked as a city missionary, encountering street children firsthand. In his 1872 book, The Dangerous Classes of New York and 20 Years' Work Among Them, Brace vividly described these encounters: ragged, tear-stained faces that haunted him. The children forced into lives of petty crime or prostitution to survive. He viewed them not as inherently criminal, but as victims of environment, arguing that urban poverty bred vice and that institutional care stifled potential. Inspired by European placing out programs where children were apprenticed to rural families, Brace rejected institutions as human warehouses. He believed the ideal environment for a child was a family home, particularly a Protestant farming one in the countryside, where fresh air, honest labor, and Christian value would instill character and self-reliance. The best of all asylums for the outcast child is the farmer's home, he wrote. Rural America, expanding westward with homesteaders needing labor, seemed the perfect match. Families gained helping hands, children gained opportunity. In 1853, at age 27, Brace founded the Children's Aid Society with a group of philanthropists and reformers. The CAS initially focused on urban interventions, industrial schools teaching trades, lodging houses providing cheap beds and meals, Sunday schools for moral instruction, and fresh air. Summer programs sending children to the countryside temporarily. These efforts helped thousands but couldn't scale to the growing crisis. Brace's breakthrough was the emigration plan, systematically relocating children westward. After small trials placing children in nearby rural New York, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut, the CAS organized its first large group in September 1854. On October 1, a train carrying about 45 children, mostly boys and girls aged 7 to 15, arrived in Dowagiac, Michigan, accompanied by Agent E.P. Smith. The children, dressed in new clothes, were presented at a public meeting. Local committees had advertised the arrival. Families inspected them, often checking strength or demeanor, and selected placements. By week's end, most found homes. The rest continued to Iowa. This pilot was deemed a success, paving the way for thousands more trains. Brace raised funds through writings, speeches, and wealthy donors. The CAS emphasized that children should be treated as family members, educated, and raised morally, not just as laborers, though enforcement was lax. The movement's purpose was multifaceted: rescue children from urban vice, prevent future criminality, supply labor to frontier farms, and promote Protestant values. It reflected 19th-century beliefs in environmental determinism, that changing surroundings could redeem character, and evangelical optimism. Yet, from the start, it was controversial. Critics argued placements lacked vetting, ignored religious matches, and resembled indentured servitude. Follow-up was minimal. Some children thrived, others suffered abuse or exploitation. Nonetheless, the orphan train movement became a precursor to modern foster care. Brace's core idea, that family homes are superior to institutions, remains foundational in child welfare. By prioritizing placement over institutionalization, it influenced later reforms, including child labor laws and the establishment of formalized adoption and foster systems in the early 20th century. Though flawed and ended in 1929 amid growing regulations and family support programs, its legacy endures. 200,000 to 250,000 children relocated, the reshaping American child welfare and highlighting the enduring tension between rescue and rights. To end selection and journey process, the process of selecting children for the orphan trains and their subsequent journeys westward was a meticulous yet deeply dehumanizing operation that reflected the era's blend of charitable intent and pragmatic expediency. Run primarily by the Children's Aid Society and later by similar organizations like the New York Foundling Hospital, the system involved gathering children from urban environments, preparing them for relocation, and transporting them across the country in groups ranging from a dozen to over 100. While the CAS framed this as a rescue mission, the reality for many children was one of confusion, fear, and loss of agency, as they were uprooted from familiar surroundings, however harsh, and thrust into an uncertain future. Selection began in the crowded streets, tenements, and institutions of New York City. Agents from the CAS, often young men or women trained in social work precursors, scoured the city for suitable candidates. Children were sourced from several pools: true orphans whose parents had died from disease, accident, or poverty-related causes, half-orphans, with one deceased parent and the surviving one unable to care for them, abandoned children left at foundling hospitals or police stations, and those surrendered by impoverished parents who hoped the program would offer better opportunities than they could provide. Importantly, many children were not orphans at all, but came from families temporarily overwhelmed by economic hardship, immigration struggles, or illness. Parents sometimes signed surrender papers under duress or with promises that they could reclaim their children later. a promise rarely kept due to poor record, keeping and distance. The CS preferred children aged 6 to 15, old enough to work but young enough to adapt. The infants and toddlers were harder to place and often handled separately by Catholic organizations like the Sisters of Charity at the New York Foundling Hospital, which ran its own baby trains starting in the 1870s. Physical health and appearance mattered. Agents sought sturdy, attractive children likely to appeal to rural families. Sickly or disabled children were often rejected for relocation, left in institutions instead. Siblings were supposed to be kept together when possible, but this rule was frequently broken if separate families showed interest. Once identified, children were brought to CS headquarters or lodging houses for evaluation and preparation. They underwent basic medical checks, were bathed, deloused, and dressed in new, simple clothing, often stiff shoes and ill-fitting suits or dresses that marked them as charity children. Agents interviewed them to assess temperament and skills, teaching basic manners, prayers, and hygiene. Some attended brief classes in reading or trades. The CS emphasized acing Protestant children with Protestant families, but religious matching was inconsistent, especially for Catholic immigrant children, leading to later controversies. Preparation included emotional framing. Children were told they were going to nice country homes, with farms, animals, and kind families. While some were excited, many were terrified, clinging to siblings or familiar streets. Older children understood the finality, younger ones often did not. Runaways were common before departure. Some hid in alleys rather than board the train. The journey itself was grueling and transformative. Groups departed from Grand Central Depot or similar stations, accompanied by 1 or 2 adult agents. Trains were ordinary passenger or immigrant cars, not luxurious, hard wooden seats, shared berths if overnight, and basic provisions like bread, cheese, and apples packed in baskets. Journeys lasted days or weeks, covering hundreds of miles to states like Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, and as far as Texas or Michigan. Stops were arranged through local committees of ministers, businessmen, or farmers who advertised arrivals via newspapers, church bulletins, or posters, wanted homes for orphan children. At each stop, town halls, churches, or opera houses, children were paraded on stages or platforms for inspection. This showing was the most infamous aspect, often likened to slave auctions. Families scrutinized the children, lifting arms to check muscles, examining teeth for health, asking about skills like milking cows or sewing. Agents narrated brief histories, good worker, obedient girl, while discouraging questions about parentage to avoid stigma. Children were instructed to smile, stand straight, and perform talents like singing hymns. Those selected signed indenture, like agreements promising education and fair treatment until age 18 or marriage, though these were rarely enforced. Not all children were chosen at the first stop. Unselected ones, often older, darker, skinned, or less appealing, continued westward, growing dirtier and more discouraged with each rejection. Some rode multiple trains over weeks. The emotional toll was immense. Siblings separated when only one was picked. The children weeping as trains pulled away from chosen friends. Agents maintained order with strict rules, no talking to strangers, bedtime prayers, but also offered comfort, reading stories or playing games. Dangers included illness, accidents, or predatory adults at stations. Yet moments of wonder existed. Many urban children saw countryside for the first time, vast prairies, starry skies, farm animals, sparking awe amid anxiety. By the 1880s, at peak operation, dozens of trains ran annually, relocating thousands. The New York Foundling Hospital added mercy trains for infants, placed via advance applications rather than public viewings. Records were haphazard, many children lost birth names, ages fudged for appeal. This process, while efficient in moving large numbers, prioritized quantity over quality. Minimal screening of host families, often just a pastor's recommendation, left children vulnerable. The journey symbolized both hope and trauma, and escape from city perils, but at the cost of autonomy and family ties. Survivors' memoirs, like those in the Orphan Train Riders collection, recount the stage inspections as the most humiliating memory. a public commodification that lingered lifelong. Ultimately, the selection and journey process encapsulated the movement's contradictions, a humanitarian effort rooted in 19th century optimism about environment and labor, yet executed with methods that stripped children of dignity and choice, foreshadowing the abuses many would face in placement homes. 3. Success stories and positive outcomes. While the orphan train movement is often remembered for its controversies and the hardships endured by many children, it also produced numerous heartwarming success stories and positive outcomes that underscored its potential to transform young lives. For countless riders, relocation from the perilous streets of New York to rural homes offered a lifeline, escape from poverty, crime, and institutional neglect into environments of stability, education, and familial love. The Children's Aid Society and other organizations frequently highlighted these triumphs in reports and publications to garner support, and surviving riders' memoirs often expressed profound gratitude, viewing the program as a pivotal chance at a better life compared to the dangers of urban destitution. Estimates of positive placements vary, but a prominent 1910 survey by the CAS claimed that 87% of children relocated to rural homes had done well, becoming creditable members of society, with only 8% returning to New York and 5% facing negative fates like death, disappearance, or arrest. While modern historians debate the accuracy of these self-reported figures, citing incomplete follow-ups and potential bias, the contemporary accounts and rider testimonies support the notion that a significant portion, perhaps half or more, found loving homes where they were treated as full family members, educated, and nurtured. Among the most celebrated successes were riders who rose to prominence, demonstrating the movement's capacity to foster ambition and achievement. Two standout examples are Andrew Burke and John Green Brady, both placed in Indiana in 1859 and lifelong friends from their shared train journey. Andrew Burke, originally from New York streets, was adopted by a farming family that encouraged his education. He became a successful businessman, served in the Civil War, and was elected governor of North Dakota, advocating for education and veterans' rights. Similarly, John Green Brady, who endured early hardships, was placed of a supportive family, attended Yale University, and became a missionary before being appointed governor of Alaska. He fought for Native Alaskan rights and even reunited publicly with Burke decades later, symbolizing the program's redemptive power. Other riders achieved notable careers. Some became judges, college professors, bankers, journalists, physicians, clergymen, artists, or high school principals. Reports mention alumni including congressmen, state legislators, lawyers, and railroad officials. For instance, Eden Abez, placed in Kansas in 1917, grew up to become a renowned songwriter, penning the hit Nature Boy, recorded by Nat King Cole. These stories were not anomalies. Many riders integrated seamlessly into rural communities, marrying, raising families, and contributing as farmers, teachers, or business owners. Personal memoirs from riders often radiate gratitude. In collections like Orphan Train Riders, Their Own Stories, survivors recount being welcomed into homes where they experienced love for the first time. Irma Craig Schneiders, placed in Missouri in 1901, described her adoptive family as one that loved me and reared me just like I was their own child. Lee Nailing, whose story is detailed in Andrea Warren's Orphan Train Rider, One Boy's True Story, was separated from siblings and found a stable Texas home, later reflecting on the opportunity afforded him despite initial trauma. Many riders, even those who faced initial challenges, emphasized that rural life, fresh air, wholesome work, and moral guidance far surpassed the alternatives of street life, gangs, or overcrowded orphanages. The reunions organized by groups like the National Orphan Train Complex in Concordia, Kansas, and the Orphan Train Heritage Society brought aging riders together to share these positive narratives. In interviews and gatherings, survivors spoke of cherished adoptive parents, opportunities for schooling denied in cities, and the sense of belonging that shaped their adulthood. One rider noted low divorce rates among placements as evidence of stable upbringings. Descendants, estimated at over 2 million today, often trace family prosperity back to these roots. The positive outcomes extended beyond individuals to societal impact. By prioritizing family placement over institutionalization, the movement laid groundwork for modern foster care, proving that many children thrived in home environments. Rural families gained not just labor but cherished members. One adoptive father quipped to a newspaper that the process beats the stork all hollow, having specified and received a child matching his wishes perfectly. Of course, successes were uneven. Infants and younger children often fared better in adoptions, while teens sometimes struggled with labor expectations. Yet, for those who found nurturing homes, the trains represented hope, realized transformation from street Arabs into productive citizens. As one scholar noted, many were used as strictly slave farm labor. But there are stories, wonderful stories of children ending up in fine families that loved them, cherished them, educated them. These triumphs, amplified through kiosk promotions and rider testimonies, helped sustain the program for decades and remind us of its dual legacy. Profound rescue amid undeniable risks, foray nightmare homes and abuse. The orphan train movement's darker side reveals a harrowing reality for many of the relocated children. Instead of finding loving families, thousands were thrust into exploitative, abusive environments where they were valued primarily as sources of cheap or free labor. While the Children's Aid Society and similar organizations promoted the program as a benevolent rescue, inadequate screening of host families, minimal follow-up, and the era's acceptance of harsh child labor allowed widespread mistreatment. Survivors' accounts, historical records, and later investigations paint a picture of physical beatings, emotional neglect, overwork, and in some cases, sexual exploitation, turning what was promised as a fresh start into enduring nightmares. Central to these abuses was the economic motivation of many rural families. In the expanding American Midwest and West during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, farms demanded intensive labor for plowing, harvesting, milking, and household chores. With adult hired hands costly, children from the trains provided an appealing alternative, often indentured until age 18 or 21 with little legal oversight. Agreements promised education and fair treatment, but these were rarely enforced. Many children worked dawn to dusk, performing adult-level tasks without compensation beyond basic food and shelter. Boys might haul heavy loads or tend livestock in brutal weather. Girls cooked, cleaned, and cared for large families. One rider recalled working, like a slave, on a Kansas farm, rising at 4 a.m., for chores that left no time for school. Physical abuse was rampant in dysfunctional placements. Beatings with whips, belts, switches, or farm tools were common for perceived laziness or mistakes. Some children bore permanent scars from severe punishments, others suffered broken bones, burns, or malnutrition from being fed scraps while the family ate better. Emotional abuse compounded the trauma. Children were constantly reminded they were charity cases, paupers, or unwanted burdens, denied affection, and isolated from community events or peers. Many were forbidden from attending school, perpetuating cycles of illiteracy and dependence. Siblings placed separately endured heartbreaking separations, with correspondence discouraged and reunions nearly impossible due to distance and poor records. Sexual abuse, though difficult to document in the era due to profound stigma, emerged in survivor testimonies and rare investigations. Vulnerable girls, and occasionally boys, faced predation from adoptive fathers, older sons, or farmhands. Historians have uncovered cases where children were passed between homes after whispered complaints, only to encounter similar dangers elsewhere. Runaways were frequent, desperate children fleeing on foot through unfamiliar countryside, hiding in barns or forests, risking starvation, recapture, and escalated punishment upon return. Systemic failures enabled these horrors. Local placement committees screened families superficially, often accepting a minister's recommendation or community reputation without home visits or references. Wealthy or influential applicants were seldom denied, even if rumors of harshness existed. CS agents conducted follow-up visits sporadically, if at all, constrained by vast distances, limited staff, and funding. When visits occurred, children were sometimes coached or threatened to report positively. Say you're happy and well treated, or you'll get worse when they leave. Negative reports might result in replacement, which often meant further instability and trauma rather than protection. Memoirs from writers, preserved in archives like the National Orphan Train Complex in Cordia, Kansas, detail lifelong psychological scars. One woman described being locked in a root cellar for days as punishment. Another boy recounted being chained in a barn like an animal after attempting escape. Adult survivors spoke of profound identity loss, birth names changed arbitrarily, ages altered for placement appeal, family histories erased, and lingering distrust of authority. Many only shared their full stories late in life, during reunions organized by survivor groups in the mid-20th century, where suppressed memories surfaced amid tears and mutual recognition. Contemporary critics, including Catholic Church leaders protecting immigrant children and early progressive reformers, condemned the system as little better than child slavery or indentured servitude. Comparisons to historical forced labor systems arose, particularly when non-Protestant children were placed in religiously mismatched homes against parental wishes. By the 1880s, at the movement's peak, scandals surfaced, such as placements in Arizona and Texas where children were reportedly treated as virtual slaves on large ranches, prompting limited investigations and calls for reform, though meaningful change came slowly. Not every poor placement stemmed from deliberate malice. Some arose from host families' own poverty, large broods, or cultural norms that viewed children primarily as workers rather than individuals needing nurture. Yet the program's structural flaws amplified suffering exponentially. Historians today estimate that while many children thrived or at least survived adequately, a substantial minority, perhaps 30–50% based on survivor accounts and incomplete records, endured significant abuse or exploitation, with some fates remaining unknown forever. This dark legacy underscores the profound risks of the orphan train movement. In its ambitious attempt to rescue thousands through mass relocation without robust child protection mechanisms, it inadvertently condemned many to nightmare homes, leaving physical and emotional scars that echoed through generations and shaped modern demands for regulated trauma-informed foster care. 5. Criticism and the end of the movement. The orphan train movement, once hailed as a groundbreaking humanitarian effort, increasingly faced sharp criticism in its later decades, ultimately leading to its decline and termination by 1929. Critics from religious groups, child welfare advocates, state governments, and even some former supporters argued that the program's flaws, lack of proper vetting, family separations, religious mismatches, and widespread reports of abuse outweighed its benefits. As American society evolved with new ideas about child rights, professional social work, and government responsibility, the unchecked, placing out system came to be seen as outdated, risky, and in some cases, morally indefensible. The movement's end marked a pivotal shift toward regulated foster care, family preservation, and maternal support programs. Early criticism emerged almost immediately but gained momentum in the 1870s and 1880s. Catholic leaders were among the first to protest vigorously. Many orphan-trained children were Irish or Italian Catholic immigrants, yet the Protestant-run Children's Aid Society often placed them with evangelical rural families who discouraged or forbade Catholic practice. This sparked accusations of religious kidnapping and cultural erasure. In 1874, the New York Foundling Hospital, a Catholic institution, began its own placement program partly to counter caste dominance and protect Catholic children. High-profile clashes occurred such as the 1870s Arizona kidnapping scandal, where Catholic priests and vigilantes forcibly placed children from Protestant homes, claiming coercion and religious suppression. Progressive reformers and emerging social workers also attacked the system. Figures like Sophonisba Breckinridge and Jane Addams argued that mass relocation ignored individual needs and family bonds. They viewed indenture-like agreements as akin to child slavery or indentured servitude, especially when children were treated as laborers rather than family members. State charities and child protection societies in receiving states like Missouri, Illinois, and Michigan began documenting abuse cases and demanding oversight. By the 1890s, reports of beatings, overwork, and neglect prompted legislative inquiries. Critics highlighted how poor follow-up allowed unsuitable homes, alcoholics, the mentally unstable, or the merely greedy to take children with impunity. The rise of professional social work further eroded support. That the first White House Conference on Children in 1909 emphasized home care over institutionalization but stressed careful placement and supervision, standards the orphan trains largely failed to meet. Influential voices like those from the charity organization Society advocated case-by-case assessment by trained workers, the not mass distribution. They argued that poverty alone should not justify permanent family separation, and that supporting struggling parents was preferable to dispersal. Legal changes sealed the program's fate. States began enacting laws restricting out-of-state placements. Michigan passed a 1891 law requiring bonds from adoptive families. Missouri followed in 1899. By the early 20th century, many Midwestern states mandated licensing, home studies, and probationary periods, requirements the Kias and similar groups could not consistently fulfill across vast distances. The most decisive blow came in the 1920s. Several states prohibited importing children without state approval, effectively blocking interstate trains. Federal momentum grew too, though no national law banned the practice outright. Evolving norms discouraged it. World War I and the 1920s economic shifts accelerated decline. Urban child populations dropped due to immigration restrictions, reduced birth rates, and improved public health. Fewer street children meant less urgency. Simultaneously, new social programs emerged. Mothers' pensions allowed widows and poor mothers to keep children at home with financial aid. That professional adoption agencies emphasized legal processes, consent, and matching. Orphanages modernized, offering better education and preparation for independence. The CIAS itself adapted slowly. By the 1910s, it reduced long-distance placements, focusing on nearby states and increasing scrutiny. In 1920, it largely ceased Western trains. The New York Foundling Hospital continued longer, but faced lawsuits and bad publicity, including a 1904 Tennessee case where placed children were reclaimed amid abuse allegations. The Great Depression finally ended remaining efforts. The last official orphan train, sponsored by the Kias, ran in 1929, carrying a small group within New York State. In retrospect, the movement's termination reflected broader societal maturation. From 1854 to 1929, an estimated 200,000 children were relocated, a staggering scale no modern system would attempt without rigorous safeguards. Its legacy is profoundly dual. It pioneered the principle that family homes are superior to institutions, directly influencing today's foster care and adoption frameworks. The U.S. foster system traces its philosophical roots to Charles Loring Brace's belief in environmental redemption through family life. Yet the darker side, forced separations, lost identities, cultural erasure, and unchecked abuse, serves as a cautionary tale. Many writers spent lifetimes searching for siblings or birth records, forming reunion societies in the late 20th century to heal those wounds. Museums like the National Orphan Trainplex in Kansas preserve their stories, that honoring resilience while acknowledging harm. Modern child welfare experts view the movement as a transitional experiment, visionary in intent, flawed in execution. It highlighted the need for regulation, oversight, and prioritization of children's voices, lessons embedded in today's laws requiring parental rights consideration, and cultural competency and trauma-informed care. As one historian summarized, the orphan trains saved many children from the horrors of the streets, but at a cost that society later deemed too high. Their end in 1929 closed a unique chapter in American history, paving the way for a more humane, rights-based approach to vulnerable children. The orphan train movement, spanning 1854 to 1929, stands as one of the most ambitious and controversial chapters in American child welfare history. What began as a well-intentioned effort to rescue thousands of vulnerable children from the dangers of urban streets ultimately became a complex legacy of hope intertwined with heartbreak. While many riders found loving homes, stability, and opportunities that transformed their lives, countless others endured exploitation, abuse, and permanent separation from their roots. The program's end in 1929 reflected a growing recognition that children deserve more than survival. They deserve safety, dignity, and the right to family whenever possible. Today, the orphan trains remind us of the dangers of large-scale solutions without adequate safeguards, and of the resilience of those who survived them. Museums, survivor reunions, and millions of descendants keep their stories alive, honoring both the triumphs and the tragedies. Above all, this movement laid the foundation for modern foster care and adoption systems, teaching enduring lessons that every child matters, that oversight and compassion must go hand in hand, and that society's treatment of its most vulnerable reveals its true character. The stories of the orphan-trained children, tales of resilience, loss, and redemption, deserve to be remembered and shared. If this history has moved you, here are meaningful ways to engage and honor their legacy. Visit a museum. Plan a trip to the National Orphan Complex and Museum in Concordia, Kansas. It houses artifacts, photographs, and personal stories from writers, and is a powerful place to connect with this chapter of American history. Laws support modern child welfare. Donate to or volunteer with organizations working to protect vulnerable children today, such as CASA foster care programs, or charities focused on family preservation and reunification. To learn more and share, read books like Orphan Train by Christina Baker Klein, We Rode the Orphan Trains by Andrea Warren, or memoirs from actual writers. Share what you've learned with others to keep these voices alive. Trace your roots. If you suspect your family has orphan train connections, explore resources like the Orphan Train Riders Database or ancestry sites for possible links. Their courage reminds us that every child deserves safety, love, and a chance to thrive. Let's honor them by ensuring no child today faces a similar uncertain journey alone. Take one small step today.